My grandmother has a habit of tucking things into envelopes. Birthday cards, newspaper clippings she thinks you'd find interesting, coupons for stores you've never been to. So when a thick envelope arrived at my parents' house addressed to me, nobody thought anything of it. At least, that's what I believed for a very long time. I was 26 when Grandma passed. I'd moved back home for 3 months after losing my job at the marketing firm. Just temporarily, just until I got back on my feet. That was the plan. My parents were understanding about it, or they seemed to be. My mom made my favorite dinners and my dad pretended not to notice when I slept until 10. It was a hard season and they were good to me during it, which is why what I eventually found out made everything so much worse. Grandma had been sick for 2 years before she died. She never made it dramatic. She just got quieter, slower. Then one Tuesday morning in October, she was gone. She left behind a small house in Clover Hill, a vegetable garden nobody was going to maintain, 14 years of Reader's Digest, and whatever was in her will. I didn't know the specifics of the will. I assumed it was split evenly between her 3 children, my mom, my uncle, and my aunt who lived in Phoenix. I wasn't expecting anything for myself. Grandma had paid for my college tuition, which she'd always said was her gift to me while she was alive so she could watch me enjoy it. I figured that was my inheritance, early and complete. I went back to my apartment 6 months after she died. I'd found a new job, a small studio in the same city, a reason to get out of my childhood bedroom. Life moved forward the way it does. I called my mom every Sunday. I visited at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt off. The first thread came loose almost by accident. I was home for my dad's birthday in March, 2 years after Grandma died. I was in the kitchen helping my mom rinse vegetables when I noticed a stack of mail on the counter. One envelope had my name on it. Not my current address, my parents' address, but my name. The return label said something about a financial institution I didn't recognize. Coldwell Financial Services. I picked it up. My mom looked up from the sink, and something moved across her face so fast I almost didn't catch it. Almost. "Oh, that's probably junk," she said. "You get those sometimes. You know how they send things to old addresses." I turned it over. It was sealed, not junk mail thin. It had weight to it. "I'll just take it with me," I said. "Of course." She turned back to the vegetables. Her hands were very still. I put it in my bag and didn't think about it again until I was home that Sunday night, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, going through the small pile of things I'd brought back from the visit. I opened the envelope without any particular expectation. It was a statement, an account statement, from something called the Coldwell Family Trust, established in the name of my grandmother. The account listed a beneficiary, my name. I read it 3 times. The balance shown was not a small number. It was the kind of number that changes things, the kind you see and then look away from because you're not sure you read it right. I looked away. I looked back. It was still there, just under $200,000. I sat with that for a long time. The tea went cold. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. I read the entire statement twice more, every line, trying to understand what I was looking at. The account had been opened 4 years ago, while Grandma was still alive. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. There had been regular deposits over the years, clearly part of a deliberate, planned gift. And then there was a notation I had to read 4 times before it fully registered. The account had been closed 14 months ago. The funds had been dispersed, but not to me. I didn't sleep that night. I spent most of it sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, trying to find any version of this that made sense. Maybe there'd been a mistake. Maybe there was another account I didn't know about. Maybe the funds had been moved somewhere and I just hadn't been notified. I talked myself into and out of panic several times before morning. The next day, I called Coldwell Financial Services. I explained who I was, gave my social security number, answered the verification questions. The representative was polite and careful in the way that people are when they're about to tell you something you're not going to like. The account had been closed by the estate executor 14 months prior. The funds had been transferred to a joint account held by my parents. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store for 45 minutes. My parents were the estate executors. I hadn't known that either, but it made sense. They were the oldest of the three siblings, the most organized, the ones who lived closest to Grandma. Of course she had trusted them. I thought about that word for a while. Trusted. Here's what I want to be clear about. I did not go home and confront them. Every instinct I had said, don't do that yet. Because if I went home angry with nothing but a single account statement that they could explain away, they would explain it away. My mom would look at me with that expression she had, calm, slightly wounded, and tell me I'd misunderstood. My dad would say these things are complicated. Probate takes time. The money was being held for me, and I would leave without answers, and they would know I was looking. So instead, I got a lawyer. Her name was Gloria, and a friend from college had used her for a landlord dispute. I called the next morning and made an appointment for that Friday. I brought the statement, my ID, and a notebook. I told her everything I knew, which wasn't much. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me a few questions that I didn't fully understand at the time, but later realized were exactly the right ones. Did I have any documentation of the original will? Did I know who the attorney was who drafted it? Had I ever signed anything in relation to Grandma's estate? The answer to all three was no. Gloria told me that what I described, if accurate, was a serious breach of fiduciary duty at minimum and potentially criminal fraud. She told me not to contact my parents. She told me to get her a copy of the probate filing, which was a matter of public record. I hadn't known that. I hadn't known that when someone dies and goes through probate, the filings are public. You can walk into the county courthouse where the estate was handled and request the documents. So that's what I did. I drove the 2 hours to my grandmother's county on a Tuesday I'd taken off work. I sat in a beige government office and waited while a clerk pulled the file. It took about 20 minutes. When she handed me the folder, my hands were steady, which surprised me. The will was there. My grandmother had written it 4 years ago, the same year she'd opened the trust account. She had left her house to be split between her 3 children. She had left her personal belongings to be divided among the family. And she had left the trust account, the Coldwell Family Trust, entirely, solely to me. There was a handwritten note attached to the trust documentation in the will. My grandmother's handwriting, which I would recognize anywhere. She wrote in these careful, slightly tilted letters, always in blue ink. This is for my granddaughter to use as she sees fit, for a home, for security, for whatever life asks of her. I want her to have a foundation. Every woman should have a foundation. I had to stop reading for a moment. Then I kept reading. The estate had been filed by my parents as co-executors, exactly as I'd suspected. Everything looked correct on paper. The house had been sold and the proceeds divided. The personal belongings had been distributed, and the trust account, listed clearly in the will with my name on it, had been noted as transferred per beneficiary agreement. Beneficiary agreement. I went back to Gloria with the copies. She requested the actual trust transfer documents through a formal records request. What came back 2 weeks later showed that the funds had been transferred based on a signed form, a form that had my name on it. I had never signed anything. Gloria sent the form to a document examiner. I won't go into the full details of what the examiner found, but the conclusion was not ambiguous. The signature was not mine. By this point, I'd been sitting on all of this for nearly 3 months. I hadn't called my mom on Sundays. I'd said I was busy, stressed with work, just going through a phase of needing quiet. She'd been understanding. Of course she had. My grandmother's birthday was in June. Our family had always gathered on her birthday, even after she was gone at my parents' house for dinner to remember her. My mom called to make sure I was coming. My uncle would be there. My aunt from Phoenix was flying in, all the cousins. I said yes. I told Gloria where I'd be. I thought about not going. I thought about it a lot, actually, in those final weeks. I thought about just filing the legal complaint and letting the lawyers handle it, never sitting across a dinner table from my parents again, letting the whole thing happen in a courtroom with strangers. It would have been cleaner, maybe, easier on everyone. But I kept coming back to what my grandmother had written. Every woman should have a foundation. She had thought about me. She had sat down and planned, deliberately, carefully, to make sure I had something solid under my feet. She had trusted the people she loved most to carry that out. I wanted to look my mother in the eye. I arrived at my parents' house a little early, which I never do. My cousin was already there helping set up the backyard table. My uncle was opening a bottle of wine. My aunt came out of the kitchen and hugged me for a long time, which made something in my chest feel hollow. Dinner was normal. That was the strangest part. How normal it was. My dad told a story about his golf game. My cousin talked about her new apartment. My aunt showed us pictures from a trip she'd taken to Portugal. The food was good. The evening was warm. After dinner, while everyone was still sitting with their coffee and dessert plates, my aunt said something offhand that I hadn't expected. "I keep meaning to ask," she said, looking at my mom. "Did everything get sorted out with the trust, the one Mom set up for her?" She nodded at me. The table didn't go quiet immediately. It took about 3 seconds, the time it takes for a question to land and people to register what was just said. My mom's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. I looked at her. She looked at me. And I watched her decide, in real time, how to handle this. I could see it, the calculation happening behind her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Everything was sorted out. It was part of the estate process." "Oh, good," my aunt said, clearly not understanding that anything was wrong. I just remember Mom mentioning it, and I thought, well, I'm glad it was handled. "It was handled," my mom said. I put my fork down. "Actually," I said, "I've been wanting to talk about that." The conversation that followed was not a screaming match. It was worse than that in some ways. It was very quiet. My dad said almost nothing. My mom kept her voice level and used phrases like the complexity of estate management, and we intended to set it aside for you, and there were tax considerations. My uncle asked a question and she answered it smoothly, but I had the documents. I had brought copies, which I'd left in my car, but I told them exactly what I had: the will, the trust statement, the transfer form, the examiner's report. My mom looked at the table. My dad looked at my mom. My aunt looked at me and said very quietly, "Oh, I want to be honest about what it felt like in that moment." It didn't feel like winning. It felt like finding out that the floor of a room you'd trusted your whole life was never quite solid, and now you could feel every soft spot beneath your feet. It felt like grief, strangely similar to the feeling I'd had when Grandma died, that low, dull ache of losing something you can't get back. I told them I had an attorney. I told them I had filed a complaint with the state bar against the attorney who had handled the estate, because Gloria had reviewed his involvement and found irregularities in how he'd documented the transfer. I told them what the likely legal consequences were, which Gloria had laid out for me clearly and without sugarcoating. My mom started to cry. My dad put his hand over his face. I didn't say anything else. I drove home that night with all the windows down. I had a voicemail from Gloria by 9 the next morning. The legal process took almost a year. I won't pretend it was clean or fast or anything but exhausting. My parents retained an attorney. There were depositions. There were months where I didn't know which way it would go, where I lay awake replaying conversations and second-guessing every decision. My relationship with my uncle and aunt became complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. They were supportive of me, but they were also losing their version of our family, and grief looks different on different people. What I can tell you is what happened in the end. My parents were required to return the full amount, plus interest calculated from the date of the fraudulent transfer. They had spent a significant portion of it: home renovations, a trip to Europe I now remembered hearing about, things that hadn't seemed suspicious because I hadn't known there was anything to be suspicious of. To make up the difference, they had to take a lien against their house. They were not prosecuted criminally. Gloria had told me that was possible but unlikely, given that they had made full restitution and had no prior record. I've had complicated feelings about that. I still do. The money is in an account in my name now. I haven't touched most of it. I've thought about what Grandma wrote: a home for security, for whatever life asks of her, and I'm trying to do it justice. I bought a small condo 8 months ago. I stood in the empty living room the day I got the keys and thought about her handwriting, the blue ink, the careful tilted letters. I called my mom for the first time in almost 2 years, a few months after the settlement. The conversation was short and careful, the way conversations are when there's too much beneath them. I don't know where that goes. I don't know if it goes anywhere. What I know is that my grandmother thought about me. She made a plan. She chose, deliberately, to give me a foundation, and even when that choice was buried and redirected and nearly erased, it found its way back. I am her granddaughter. I don't think she'd be surprised it took some fighting to get what was mine. She was always the kind of woman who thought you should know how to fight for the right things. I'm learning. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it all unfolded, whether I wish I had confronted my parents sooner, or quieter, or not at all. I never know how to answer that cleanly, because the honest answer is complicated in a way that a yes or a no can't hold. What I know is this. My grandmother made a decision with full clarity of mind. She sat down, thought it through, put it in writing, had it witnessed and filed. She planned for me, and the reason that plan nearly disappeared wasn't chaos or confusion. It was a deliberate choice made by two people who knew exactly what they were doing. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with, not the money, the choice. There's something about being betrayed by the people who raised you that scrambles your sense of what's real. You start second-guessing your own memory. You think, did I misread this? Is there an explanation I'm not seeing? I spent weeks in that fog, replaying dinners and phone calls, looking for something I might have missed. And eventually I understood that the fog itself was part of why it had worked for as long as it did. When you trust someone completely, you don't look for the thing they're hiding. Getting a lawyer was the first moment I felt solid ground under my feet again. Not because Gloria fixed anything immediately, she didn't, it took almost a year, but because I had stopped waiting for someone else to tell me what was true. I had the documents, I'd done the work. I was no longer asking permission to trust what I already knew. I think about the version of me that almost didn't open that envelope, who almost left it on the counter because my mom said it was probably junk. That version of me would have gone home and never known. And I think about that not with relief exactly, but with the kind of sobriety. How much depends on small moments? A sealed envelope, a walk to the parking lot, a decision to look closer instead of away. My grandmother wrote that every woman should have a foundation. I've thought about those words more than almost anything else from this whole experience. She wasn't just talking about money, I don't think. She was talking about the thing that keeps you standing when everything around you shifts. The capacity to know your own worth well enough to fight for it. The willingness to ask hard questions even when the answers are going to cost you something. I paid for this foundation twice. Once, my grandmother paid for it with her savings and her love. The second time, I paid for it with a year of legal proceedings, a fractured family, and the loss of a version of my parents I believed in my whole life. That second cost was real. I don't want to minimize it. But I live in my own home now. I made that choice deliberately, carefully, the way she would have wanted. And when I stand in my living room on a quiet morning, I feel exactly what she meant. Something solid, something mine. That's what she left me. Not just the money, the proof that I was worth planning for. I just had to be brave enough to go get it.